Hi, I'm Jake, 32, and last Saturday night, my 4-year relationship with Chloe didn't just hit a speed bump, it exploded into a confetti of regret and cheap Prosecco right in front of 25 mutual friends. We were at our friends Mark and Sarah's annual summer bash. The kind of party where the air conditioning fails but the music is just good enough to make you sweat happily. I was feeling pretty good. I'd managed to talk Chloe into leaving her work phone in the car, and we were leaning against the kitchen counter, watching people attempt to dance without spilling their drinks. I was telling a slightly embarrassing story about a trip to IKEA when the lighting fixture above us flickered, and Chloe just stopped listening. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring across the room at a group of finance guys doing a particularly aggressive shoulder shimmy. She took a long, slow sip of her drink, looked me dead in the eye, and with a voice loud enough to carry over the bass line, she sighed dramatically and said, "Ugh, I wish I'd come single. I'd be having more fun." The entire universe stopped. It wasn't a joke. Her face was perfectly serious, maybe even slightly pained, as if she was lamenting a truly missed opportunity, like a lottery ticket she forgot to scratch. A girl standing near us, holding a bowl of guacamole like a shield, actually gasped. I managed a weak, involuntary chuckle, trying to sell it as a brilliant piece of sarcasm, but the sound died in my throat. Chloe didn't laugh back. She just rolled her eyes, placed her empty glass on the counter, and walked away, heading straight towards the aggressively shimmied finance guys, leaving me standing there next to the stunned guacamole girl, who eventually just patted my arm awkwardly and said, "I'm so sorry, dude," before retreating to the safety of the vegetable platter. For the next hour, I navigated the party like a sentient piece of furniture, trying desperately to process the sentence while avoiding Chloe, who was, indeed, having fun, like, genuinely, demonstrably more fun than she had ever seemed to have while attached to me. She was laughing too loud, tossing her hair too dramatically, and occasionally allowing one of the finance guys to whisper something entirely too close to her ear. I tried to maintain a facade of relaxed enjoyment. I talked about cryptocurrency with a guy I barely knew. I complimented Sarah on a punch recipe that tasted vaguely of mouthwash. But every conversation was just a distraction from the mental loop playing in my head. I wish I'd come single. I'd be having more fun. It wasn't the words themselves that were the worst, it was the sheer, brutal honesty, the unvarnished revelation that being my partner was apparently a drag, a verifiable funsuck. I'm not some kind of party tyrant. I can do the electric slide and I appreciate a good anecdote, but apparently, compared to the uninhibited joy of being available, I was the human equivalent of a library's closing time announcement. When I finally worked up the courage to walk over and grab a drink from the bar area where Chloe was now standing, I caught the end of a conversation. She was talking to a woman I'd never seen before, someone sleek and slightly intimidating. "Honestly," Chloe was saying, leaning conspiratorially, "I just need a weekend where I don't have to factor in someone else's anxiety about parking." I stood there, frozen, realizing the anxiety about parking was a thinly veiled euphemism for me. She saw me, her expression instantly shifting from lively to mildly annoyed, like I was a piece of debris that had floated into her perfect, single-girl orbit. She offered a tight, forced smile that didn't reach her eyes, and then, completely ignoring me, she turned back to the sleek woman and asked, "So which one of those guys is the pilot?" The pilot comment was the definitive turning point, not because she was flirting with a guy who flew planes, but because she was actively pretending I was air. I watched her for another 10 minutes, the entire time feeling this strange, dual sensation of profound humiliation and icy clarity. I realized that my presence wasn't just inhibiting her. It was actively annoying her. The whole evening was a masterclass in relational sabotage, executed with the casual indifference of someone swatting a mosquito. I decided I couldn't spend another minute being her invisible, anxiety-ridden parking attendant. I walked straight up to her, interrupting her mid-sentence about her imaginary single weekend. The noise of the party suddenly felt very far away. "Chloe," I said, my voice low and completely devoid of any emotion, which was probably the scariest tone I could have used. She looked irritated. "What, Jake? I'm talking." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand an explanation. I just calmly stated the undeniable truth. "We need to go right now." She scoffed, crossing her arms. "I'm not ready to leave. You can wait in the car." That was it. That was the final, condescending dismissiveness that snapped the last frayed wire of my patience. I looked at her, at the bright, carefree expression that had been missing for months. and I smiled, a genuine, albeit painful, smile of realization. No, I can't wait in the car, Chloe, because I'm not going to be waiting for you anymore. I'm leaving you here. The shift in her demeanor was immediate and spectacular. The carefree mask shattered, her eyes went wide, and the sudden silence in our immediate vicinity felt like a bomb dropping. What are you talking about? She whispered, the confidence draining out of her face like bathwater. I'm talking about what you clearly want, I replied, keeping my voice steady. You wish you'd come single because you'd be having more fun. Guess what? Consider your wish granted. I'm leaving. You are now officially single at the party. Have all the fun you want. I gave a brief, ironic nod to the pilot she'd been talking to, turned on my heel, and walked straight out of the kitchen, through the crowd, and out the front door without looking back. The feeling wasn't relief, not yet. It was pure, terrifying, necessary demolition. Walking out of that party and leaving Chloe mid-flirt was simultaneously the hardest and easiest thing I've ever done. The hardest because it meant tearing apart 4 years of my life, including a lease and a very loyal cat. The easiest because, well, the alternative was staying there and absorbing another hour of her treating me like a houseplant. The drive home was a blur of silence and slightly aggressive music volume. I didn't cry. I was too fueled by a toxic mix of adrenaline and righteous indignation. I kept replaying her face when I dropped the line. Consider your wish granted. You are now, officially, single at the party. That fleeting moment of shock, of realizing her passive-aggressive gambit had backfired into a genuine life consequence, was the only revenge I needed. When I got to our apartment, which now felt less like a home and more like a crime scene, the first thing I did was gather the few things that were unequivocally mine: my laptop, my vintage turntable, and most importantly, the cat, Mittens, who instantly sensed the tectonic shift and was giving me a deeply judgmental stare. I tossed a duffel bag onto the bed and started throwing clothes into it. I was operating purely on instinct. A flight response kicking in hard. I knew if I waited, if I stayed to have a grown-up conversation, when she finally showed up, she would twist it, minimize it, and somehow turn me into the villain who abandoned her at a party. I wasn't going to give her the chance. I wrote a note, which was perhaps overly dramatic but felt necessary for the moment. It was short. I've taken Mittens and a few essentials. I'm staying at my brother's. Don't call me. Talk to the landlord and the cat lawyer. Kidding about the lawyer, Jake. I placed it carefully on her side of the bed, right next to the ridiculously expensive silk eye mask she insisted on sleeping in. 10 minutes later, I was downstairs, sliding the duffel bag and a very confused Mittens into the back seat of my car. I didn't look up at the window. I just drove away, the faint, distant bass of Mark and Sarah's party still vibrating in the air, signaling the end of my life as I knew it. The immediate aftermath was exactly what I had hoped to avoid, yet inevitably had to face: Chloe's frantic, escalating communication. I had muted my phone, but the vibrating notifications on my brother, Ethan's, kitchen table looked like a series of small, electronic seizures. She started with texts that were indignant and mildly demanding. Where are you? This is absurd, Jake. I need to get home. Then came the attempts at deflection and minimization. You seriously ruined the party. You always overreact. That quickly morphed into the aggressive self-pity. I can't believe you abandoned me. This is cruel. I deserve an explanation, immediately. I held firm. I kept the phone silent, watching the torrent of emotional manipulation unfold on the screen, feeling weirdly detached, like I was watching a documentary about a dysfunctional relationship I used to be in. Ethan, bless him, was fantastic. He poured me a stiff scotch and confiscated my car keys, declaring that I was in no state to do anything but obsess over Mittens, who was rapidly adjusting to his new single guy lifestyle by attacking Ethan's shoelaces. Look, man, Ethan said, sliding the drink across the counter. She's not mad that you broke up with her. She's mad that you took away her audience. She was counting on you waiting up until 3 a.m. so she could deliver a tearful monologue about how misunderstood she is. That observation was painfully accurate. Chloe thrived on conflict and drama, and by walking out, I hadn't just ended the relationship. I had denied her the final, climactic scene, when the calls started coming through, not just from her, but from mutual friends who had clearly been roped in as flying monkeys. I finally turned the phone completely off. I spent the next 48 hours in a quiet, guilt-free void, listening to Ethan's terrible vinyl collection and feeding Mittens too much tuna. It wasn't until Monday morning, when I realized I needed to retrieve my work suits and my electric toothbrush, that the practical reality of having to face her again set in, turning my quiet resolve into nervous dread. The return to the apartment was scheduled for high noon on Tuesday, a time I assumed she would be safely sequestered at her office, probably regaling her coworkers with a heavily edited, dramatic version of our party breakup. I wanted this to be a tactical, swift extraction of my remaining belongings. I brought Ethan as my silent, heavy-lifting bodyguard and moral compass. The key turned in the lock, and the smell of stale air and something vaguely burnt, classic post-Chloe party atmosphere, hit us. The apartment was eerily quiet, which was exactly what I had planned for. We moved fast. Ethan started in the living room. Gathering my books and video game consoles, I headed straight for the bedroom closet. Planning to grab the rest of my clothes, I opened the door, and there she was. Chloe wasn't at work. She was sitting inside the closet, literally nestled between my hanging suits and a stack of winter blankets, wearing my oldest, most stained college sweatshirt. She wasn't crying. She was reading a copy of The Art of War. "Oh, thank God," she said, looking up with an expression that was less surprise and more the smug satisfaction of a spider who had finally caught a fly. "I knew you'd come back for the clothes." The shock of finding her lurking in the closet like a tragicomic ghost momentarily knocked the wind out of me. Ethan, ever the professional, just quietly put down a box of cables and gave me a look that said, "I told you she was dramatic." "Chloe, what are you doing?" I asked, completely bewildered. "I'm waiting," she said simply, closing the book and placing it carefully on a shoe rack. "I'm waiting for the conversation we needed to have. I figured this was the most appropriate place, since our relationship has basically been hiding in the shadows for months." She was trying to frame this as profound, insightful martyrdom, but I saw through it instantly. She was cornering me, using the proximity of my clothes as leverage. "There is no conversation, Chloe. We had the conversation at the party. You made your feelings clear. I simply acted on them." I reached past her to grab a coat, careful not to touch her. "You are overreacting to a throwaway comment," she insisted, her voice starting to tremble in a calculated way. "It was sarcasm, Jake. I was clearly being funny." "No, it wasn't sarcasm," I said, looking her straight in the eye, finally feeling zero fear. "It was wish fulfillment, and I gave you what you wanted. You are single, and frankly, you should be happy. You're free to pursue all those pilot guys without having to worry about my anxiety about parking. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need my socks." She burst into theatrical tears then, a full-scale emotional eruption aimed squarely at halting my efficiency. "How can you be so cold, Jake? For years. Over a stupid comment." Ethan coughed loudly from the doorway, a beautiful, perfectly timed cough that sounded exactly like the word manipulative. I grabbed the socks, the coat, and everything else I could reach, leaving her sobbing dramatically in the relative warmth of my old sweatshirts. This time, her tears held no power over me. They were just background noise to my liberation. We finished the extraction in record time, largely thanks to Chloe's continued, theatrical sobbing in the closet, which effectively kept her contained while Ethan and I cleared out my life. We managed to get everything of importance, including the very specific, expensive coffee maker I had brought into the relationship, into the back of the SUV. The last thing I had to retrieve was the spare set of keys. I found them on the kitchen counter, next to a week-old grocery list and a passive-aggressive post-it note that read, "Your turn to clean the shower." I pocketed the keys, feeling a surge of finality. As we were loading the last box, Chloe emerged from the bedroom, dried her eyes with the back of her hand, and performed the classic post-breakup clarity pivot. She walked toward the front door, blocking our exit, and this time her voice was calm, measured, and dangerously rational. "Fine, Jake, you clearly want this. But let's be adults. We need to split the assets, specifically the car." My blood ran cold. The car was a lease I had co-signed, but I made all the payments, and it was my primary transportation. "The car?" I repeated, incredulous. "Chloe, I pay for the car. You drive it maybe once a month." "That doesn't matter," she said, leaning against the doorframe with the air of a highly compensated lawyer. "We were together when we got it. It's community property. I deserve half the value, or I keep the car for 6 months. I've already spoken to a paralegal friend of mine." Ethan stepped forward immediately, his face darkening. "A paralegal friend? Are you serious right now? After 4 years, you're going to use legal threats over a leased vehicle you barely use, because your boyfriend walked out after you publicly humiliated him?" He was brilliant, cutting through her manufactured legalism with pure, blistering logic. Chloe didn't even look at him, she only had eyes for me. "This is business, Jake, no emotion. I need to protect myself now that you've decided to suddenly change the rules of our life." It was the ultimate reveal of her transactional nature. The relationship wasn't love. It was a resource allocation she felt entitled to. I looked past her, through the open door, feeling the fresh air on my face. This was worse than the party comment. The party comment was a careless display of desire. The car threat was calculated financial cruelty, a last-ditch attempt to exert control and inflict pain. I didn't want to fight her in court, or even argue about the car. I wanted her out of my life, cleanly and absolutely. I took a deep breath, recognizing that I was about to pay a ridiculously high emotional exit tax. "Fine, Chloe," I said, pulling the car keys back out of my pocket. "Take the car. You want to be single, you need a single car. I'll arrange the lease transfer tomorrow, it's yours." Her jaw actually dropped for the second time in a week. She hadn't expected me to cave. She expected a fight she could win or leverage. The look of triumph and confusion mixed on her face was almost worth the financial loss. You're just giving me the car?" she stammered. "I'm not giving you anything," I said, leveling my gaze at her, my voice steel. "I am buying my freedom. And the price, apparently, is a leased SUV. Consider it a down payment on a life without you." I tossed the keys lightly onto the floor near her feet. "Now move, I have a life to start, and I'm not waiting for you anymore." We pushed past her, leaving her standing alone in the doorway, staring down at the keys, having won a hollow victory that cost her everything. The immediate aftermath of handing over the car, the actual, legal, final severance from Chloe, was initially crippling, then swiftly liberating. It was a massive financial hit, having to absorb the steep lease transfer fees and then immediately finance a much older, less glamorous replacement vehicle, but every dollar I spent felt like a calculated investment in my sanity. The emotional high of my grand exit from the party and the apartment wore off quickly, leaving a clean, stark landscape of genuine grief. Crucially, the grief wasn't cluttered with confusion or endless rumination, because Chloe, in her final, greedy attempt to claim the SUV as her spoils of war, had provided the perfect, indisputable evidence that the relationship was dead. And had been for a long time. She had revealed herself to be a person who valued assets and control over decency and partnership. There was no ambiguity left to haunt me. The betrayal was written in the calculated cost of the SUV lease. 3 months later, my life was gloriously unrecognizable. I had moved into a small, sunnier apartment in a part of the city I actually liked, with a friendly landlord who didn't monitor my life choices. Middens was thriving, having fully embraced the role of my supportive, albeit demanding, feline roommate and emotional barometer. The mutual friends slowly filtered back into my orbit, often leading with sheepish apologies about their involvement in the whole dramatic car wars fiasco. It was from Sarah, Mark's wife, that I got the final, most satisfyingly ridiculous update on Chloe's post-breakup life. "You won't believe this, Jake," Sarah whispered to me over coffee, leaning in like she was sharing nuclear secrets in a high-stakes spy movie. "Chloe showed up at Mark's birthday party last week, and guess who she brought?" I sighed, already bracing myself, taking a sip of my lukewarm latte. "The pilot?" "Worse, so much worse. She brought the electrician who was fixing the lights at our house that night, not the pilot, the guy who was literally standing next to the pilot, and she spent the entire night, Jake, the entire night, complaining about the humidity and how much better her old apartment was before she renovated it, which, by the way, she didn't." Sarah shook her head in amazement, her eyes wide with bewildered pity. "But that's not the best part. She drove your SUV, and she spent 20 minutes driving around the block trying to find a free street parking spot 2 blocks away, because she absolutely refused to pay the $20 for the valet parking right in front of the venue. She kept muttering, 'It's too much trouble. I have to factor in the anxiety about parking.' She was completely stressed out about a $20 convenience." I leaned back in my chair, the laughter bubbling up from a deep, honest place. The image was so profoundly perfect, so utterly definitive. The one thing she had leveraged, the one thing she had successfully extorted from me to prove her independence, the leased SUV, was now just another source of stress, another logistical problem to blame on the universe. The woman who had publicly declared her wish to be single so she could have more fun was now driving the spoils of our breakup to a party with the wrong date, only to be paralyzed by the cost of parking. It wasn't the pilot, or the car, or the party that was the barrier to her happiness. It was the perpetual state of dissatisfaction she carried with her, a massive, unacknowledged baggage claim that she hauled into every situation. The problem wasn't me, or my purported anxiety about parking. The problem was her inability to simply be happy with what she had or where she was. I wasn't the fun suck, I was the convenient scapegoat. Well, I guess she got everything she wanted then, I told Sarah, a genuine, philosophical smile spreading across my face. She got the car, she got the single life, and she still got the parking anxiety. It seems I wasn't the problem, I was just the excuse. Sarah nodded slowly, suddenly seeing the clarity that I had spent months fighting for. She's always going to be the main character in her own drama, isn't she? Always, I confirmed. And I finally realized I don't need a supporting role in that production. I realized then that the final, most valuable thing I got out of the entire experience was the gift of perspective. I had thought I was buying her a moment of honesty when I walked out of that kitchen, but what I really bought was my own freedom. The relationship had ended not when she made the cruel comment, but when I finally accepted the truth of it and removed myself from the equation. The price of that freedom, the emotional pain, the lost years, the cost of the SUV, was high, yes, but it was finite, and it was paid in full. I was no longer waiting for her to come home, no longer waiting for her to acknowledge me, and no longer waiting for her to finally start having fun. I was simply moving forward, enjoying my quiet, less ostentatious life, with the undeniable proof that the person who truly needed to change wasn't the one who drove away, but the one who stayed behind. Perpetually stuck in an endless loop of wishing for a life she was inherently incapable of enjoying, I finished my latte, ready to face the world, parking anxiety and all, because for the first time in a very long time, I was driving my own life.